Clearance to begin.
Yeah, you introduce yourself.
Thank you. So, hi, my name is Jim Aiken. I'm with BARR Engineering. I'm a vice president there. I'm based in Minneapolis. BARR Engineering is a consulting firm, about 1,000 scientists and engineers across the country. And I am neither Mark Rokoff nor am I Kevin Solie. But Mark unfortunately couldn't join us today. He has got COVID. And so I have volunteered to provide a talk on the Legacy Rule that I believe will be substantially and materially similar to what Mark would have said had he been here. And it's also self-serving because I'm giving a talk in the next, in this room in the next session that actually kind of needs this background. So to the extent that I can offer this to you, I think it'll be helpful for you to understand what I have to say about the EPA determinations and how they might be applied to this new Legacy Rule. So with that, I'll just jump in. This is a talk that Kevin gave. I know Mark was there. Some of you may have heard some of this before, but I'll try to do it a little bit differently so that there'll be some freshness to it. By the way, Kevin Solie, my colleague, is both BARR's, one of BARR's CCR experts, as well as a real technical wizard too, and he's got a lot of background, and he's a former regulator and a former environmental manager at Basin Electric Cooperative in Bismarck, North Dakota. So today we're going to talk about the CCR rule history. I think you guys start from the beginning. Dan did a great job of introducing the 2015 rule. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Then we're going to break down the proposed legacy rule, and then talk about the schedule, which is really one of the key drivers on this, and then leave hopefully plenty of time for discussion and questions. So where did the CCR rule come from? By the way, CCR stands for coal combustion residuals. For those of you who are not totally immersed in this topic, it's a rule that it really was sort of percolating since the 90s when there was talk in Congress about revisiting what was then called the Bevel Amendment, which exempts CCR at that time, just known as different names, CCPs, and you know, there was talk about it being changed into a hazardous waste. There was talk, should it be similar to the Subtitle D MSW type waste? And something happened that changed all that, and that was the TVA spill in 2008, where impoundment breached and flooded a river and caused the whole river valley to be flooded with fly ash mixture of slurry, composed mainly of CCR. So for that reason, the CCR rule originally is really focused on getting rid of surface impoundments that are potentially have these instability issues, but also they correctly, I think, pointed out that a lot of these impoundments have a head of water in it that pushes contaminants downward, and that can cause groundwater problems. And as Dan pointed out, I mean, a lot of the challenge with the rule is that they made CCRs to be this incredibly dangerous chemical, which, by the way, is made from ash, so it's all natural earth materials. These are all naturally occurring elements that we're talking about here. And to the extent where those concentrations are greater, they will cause groundwater contamination relative to background. So that's kind of the basis of it. And as we've heard before, it was originally intended to be self-implementing, and the key person, sort of the farmer overseeing all the livestock in the CCR world, was put in place was not the EPA or states, it was the qualified professional engineer. So the QPE is the one that was given in the rule the primary business of certifying and making sure things were done in accordance with the rule. So just a list of all the things that were in that original rule, lots of certifications, there's restrictions. We're going to focus a lot on the monitoring network and sampling analysis plan, statistical method, but it also addressed all of the aspects you would expect from a waste facility. One of the things that I think Kevin and I have talked about is we're both really optimists. So let's just look at the bright side. What's the good part about the CCR rule? And I know a lot of you might say, what good part? But if you think about it, there are some kind of nice things about the CCR rule that it's hard not to like. And one is that they standardized this approach of having an indicator parameter list as your detection monitoring list, what's called the Appendix 3 list. I don't know how it works. No, yeah. So the Appendix 3 list, really general parameters which EPA put forward because they're mobile in the environment. They're good tracers. They're conservative. They don't react with stuff. And so that makes these really useful instead of most state programs, which at the time had these really long lists of all these metals that you had to sample for detection monitoring. So this in itself, if it was the only thing the CCR rule did, would be really beneficial. And the other thing is, in some ways, having this longer set of Appendix 4 monitoring that involves some of these heavier metals, which are more expensive to analyze, that's when you get into assessment monitoring. So that actually was kind of a nice thing about it. The challenge is that a lot of those Appendix 4s didn't have an MCL, which is the EPA's maximum contaminant level. Instead, they came up with groundwater protection standards, which in some cases seemed a bit arbitrary, not based on risk. Like I can't tell you that I've ever seen before the CCR rule a remediation driven by lithium. It's just generally not something that is considered to be hazardous to the environment. But according to EPA's risk assessment, it was. So what is the problem with having two sets of rules to monitor essentially the same thing? One is you've got two sets of monitoring wells, two networks that were developed for different reasons, essentially, in different lists, different regulatory requirements. You got a black and white rule, yes or no. Is there contamination? Isn't there? And I think the most important thing that I think is involved here is that it was intended to be self-implementing. And what that did was the mindset of meeting the requirements was like, okay, I'm going to get sued. Therefore, if I'm in a lawsuit, I don't want to do anybody any favors in giving them too much information. That is in contrast with an enforcement or permit program in which you're encouraged to show your work. And we just didn't have that. So I'm gonna try to skip through this, but as I'm going to talk about the Part A and Part B determinations, 0 for 17 now. They don't like, the EPA likes none of it. More importantly, some of the individual aspects of it, sort of like alternative source demonstrations, really 0 for 42 and counting. So they're just not liking anything, despite, this is important, we have 30 years of an established standard of care in the industry for how and where and why we do things, because we've had the Subtitle D rule for MSW landfills. It's essentially the same rule put forward. We've already revisited all these things, EPA's, including risk-based approaches, which EPA in this rule is not really allowing. The original rule had this carrot and stick approach. So, hey, if you have a facility, you can close it real quick, you're out of the rule. Sorry. Nope. The courts came in and said no. All that money you spent on that is back in the rule. And this gets to a topic that is pretty common, I think, with EPA enforcement around the coal power industry, is what we call winning by losing. And the idea is that you put a rule out there that even if you know it's going to get challenged in the courts, you know that utilities, by their nature, are going to try to comply with it. And if you wait long enough, even if you get overturned, they've already spent the money. And the analogy is air quality emissions equipment. Utilities have already spent the money, so even if you get overturned, it's no big deal. You still achieved your policy goal. So with the legacy rule, this was proposed in May, and as Dan mentioned, they had lots of comments on it. We're expecting that rule by May of 2024. And this year, so it's coming up, and probably the big issue is the NOTA. And one of the things about the NOTA that I think is really important is they identified a new sort of minimum amount of CCR that they base their risk assessment on. And I think that's important because I think there's room to work on that to actually show that some of these sites, by EPA's own analysis, do not have significant risk. Bottom line is they're trying to beat the Congressional Review Act. So, and hey, Prabhu, I just want to let you know, Jim Aiken taking Mark Rokoff's spot because he's sick, right? So, just let you know. No beard and and gray hair. So Mark doesn't look like Mark. So, So what's the legacy rule in a nutshell? So you've got the 2015 rule that in all these active facilities with impoundments had to close, but some of them clean closed, some of them retrofitted. Now the EPA is trying to bring in this universe of new sites, both at existing power plants, but also inactive power plants that no longer have any operations. If they had a impoundment, they're now in the universe, and there's a slide showing that. They also made some minor technical corrections. But here's the definition, and this is key. Here's an inactive facility, a utility or facility producing electric power prior to October 19, 2015, and legacy surface impoundment, CCR impoundment, that no longer receives CCR but contains CCR in liquids after October 19, 2015. So two issues here. What does it mean to contain liquids? And the other issue, how do you know that in 2015 whether it was actually containing liquids or not? And I believe, Dan, is this the subject of the lawsuit? Is this part of the wet ash litigation?
January 11th.
Yeah, the January 11th. I meant to ask you that, sorry. But
It was more on infiltration.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. Because this is going to be a big issue for a lot of our clients. Because most of the older facilities that are now closed, capped, not bothering anyone, probably have a fair number of those have wet ash in them. And obviously we don't have a time machine, so we can't go back in time and really know, and even if we did, it'd be hard to find out either. So in this case, you know, the phrase, the past is the key to the future, key to the present. In this case, the past, or the phrase, the present is the key to the past. In this case, the present is the key to the future, and we probably will have to look at these sites and evaluate whether they're currently wet to see if they meet that definition. So the new animal on the block that's completely new and made up, it wasn't required even, it wasn't in the old rule, is this CCR management unit, which is any area of land containing any CCR that's placed, otherwise managed any time, that is not already a CCR unit, because that would be in the current rule. So again, we're now extending the current rule to these other previously closed, long forgotten, in some cases long forgotten facilities. And it includes CCR placed below currently regulated CCR units. So, and I have lots of sites where we closed the former CCR ponds based on a rule definition layer that was the construction bottom of the pond back when they built the CCR pond. So there's CCR below it, but we use that basis as our closure criteria, and now those are back in the rule. It does not include closed or inactive process water ponds, cooling water ponds, wastewater ponds, storm water holding ponds, and aeration ponds, which are not CCR ponds by definition in the original rule. I will point out, however, that I don't know if any of you are involved in any corrective enforcement actions right now, but what EPA seems to be going after is these areas and really looking hard at whether or not they have what I would call de minimis amounts of CCR in them. So, for example, you've got an evaporation pond. EPA comes out to visit, sees sediment in that pond, and looks and says, "Oh, you could have received CCR, therefore it's a CCR pond." So just to be aware that that is on their radar and something they're looking hard at. And that's Region 8, by the way. The key definitions, again, CCR unit, this is the classic rule. But they also include inactive CCR at surface impoundments at active facilities after the USWAG decision was made. That's that lawsuit that USWAG actually was suing for something else, by the way. And basically the interveners and amicus briefs got the decision made to go after more on this issue. It wasn't USWAG's fault, by the way. Just want to clarify that. USWAG was trying to help the industry, and it turned out the courts brought in the rest of it. So now we've got this Legacy CCR SI. So that's that first part that Dan talked about. And then So, and this is important, CCR surface impoundments are CCR units. CCRMUs are not CCR units. They're a different animal. So if you're not totally confused by that now, and Kevin really focuses, he does a really good job with this slide, and I'm not sure I can do it justice, but applicability is kind of the big deal. What is in and what is out of this CCR rule? And it's not really clear reading the definitions. But I want to point your attention to this one. So an active facility is an act that does not include any limitation related to how the facility generates electricity, including fuel use. So the example that Dan mentioned of a 100-year-old, 150-year-old ash pile that now has a skyscraper built on it in Manhattan with solar panels on the roof is potentially covered under this rule because it's generating electricity. So active sites will likely have a CCRMU present, closed SI or closed surface impoundment or some landfill, and that is summarized by EPA's slide. And I know some people have criticized this slide and said, "Oh, this isn't right." But I find it pretty useful for me because I'm a geologist and I think in 3 dimensions and visually. So blue, it's really simple. These are the existing rule sites. Yellow and green are the new rule sites. Green is the legacy surface impoundments, or the CCR-SI. Yellow is the CCR-MUs that are involved. So you can work through this. I won't go into it in a lot of detail. I want to call your attention to this red area over here, which is not is specifically excluded from the legacy rule because these are areas that are at an active power plant, but they do not involve where there is not an inactive surface impoundment involved. So you might have just an inactive power plant site that just had a landfill. And in that case, it's excluded from the rule right now. And back in last fall, when EPA was doing their roadshow to consultants and utility members, they said that there's been a lot of complaints about this rule. And I don't know if there's any updates that you might have, Dan, but the expectation is that there'll be lawsuits and that this will be one of their goals is to bring this back into the CCR rule. Because it sort of would be the same argument that they made in the EUEC decision, which is, okay, EPA, you've made this big deal saying these CCRs are so bad. How is it possible at a completely uncontrolled site they're somehow okay? So that's the argument that's going to be out there. So just kind of skipping ahead, what we recommend to our clients is keep an eye on these as well. Make sure that you have documentation as you go forward and start meeting the compliance under the rule. Make sure you have an idea of whether you have these things and whether or not they might cause you some pain if later on they get put into the rule. So I'll just summarize exemptions. EPA's purposely said we're trying not to have any exemptions. We don't want to give anyone an exit ramp. We want all these things cleaned up. That's their sort of policy goal. So if you have no legacy SI, no CCR unit, you have no problem. Is that the same thing as no problem? And that's not applicable to active sites with no CCR unit. So if you have an inactive site, doesn't have any legacy impoundment, doesn't have an active CCR or an already regulated CCR unit, that is not in the rule. So, but if you have an inactive facility that does not include an off-site disposal facility, so even if there's a legacy surface impoundment at an inactive facility, there's no regulation of an off-site landfill. So that's kind of a break. I mean, if you don't look on the bright side, at least so far, if you have had in the original rule, off-site landfills are clearly included, but in this, they seem to be saying if it's not contiguous with the property, it's out the rule. So you don't have to include those. But on-site contiguous ones are included. And then what about off-site active facilities? So off-site disposals were included in the 2015 rule, but it's not necessarily clear in the legacy rule. I think we believe that the reasoning that we've applied is if EPA intended for those to be in it, it would say so explicitly. So more exemptions. So the original one excluded CCR placement in active or abandoned coal mines. This is an interesting topic in coal country. I don't know if you're east, maybe it's not as interesting, but it is tough to see how EPA delegated CCR authority to the Office of Surface Mine Management when the Office of Surface Mine Management doesn't seem to want to have anything to do with making rules about CCR. So OSMRE is of it. So, what we kind of use is the definition of bond release. If you're familiar with coal mines, so a lot of landfills that are in coal mines have actually had a bond release to allow for the disposal of that coal ash in the mine. That seems so. You're actually excavating a new landfill in what was already a reclaimed coal mine. That seems to me to be not mine fill, but it is certainly an open area of interpretation. All right, so this is the interactive session that I'm going to skip through. Basically, Kevin set up a quiz here so that to kind of go over the rule things, because one thing I didn't mention about Kevin, he's a professor of geology at Bismarck State College. So of course he wants to give the class rules. So I was going to say I'll give you the answers, that way it'll be easier. But let's just say of an active facility that has coal, gas, solar, any kind of power generation on it. So I've got an active landfill, I've got an active surface impoundment. How about my inactive surface impoundment is a rule? Yes, it seems that is in the rule. Your SI, your surface impoundment was closed in 2014, that's in the rule. And then a landfill was closed in 2014, also in the rule. And that's just because there are already CCR units at the site. And that was that part of the slide that had the blue area, all the yellow under the blue area is all included in the legacy rule. So your off-site active landfill is in the rule, and then your off-site landfill is closed in 2014 does not appear to be in the legacy rule. So next example, inactive facility. How am I doing for time, by the way? Sorry.
21 minutes.
All right.
Fine with us. 4 minutes.
All right. Anyway, so we're just going to kind of I just want to kind of screw. So inactive facility with no legacy unit, closed, surface impoundment closed in 2014, not in the rule, inactive rule, not in the rule, and again, landfill closed. So this is a facility with no CCR, no operations at it. In this case, this is that red box that is not. This is the offsite landfill, just currently not in the rule. But again, our caution is make sure that when you do your facility evaluation report, you're aware of that. So the requirements of the rule, I want to point your attention here to the timeline. So this is really tricky and hard to understand, but day 0 here is the day that the rule is promulgated, which is actually 6 months after the final rule is published. So that's people commonly get confused about that. But that means you have 6 months to do all this stuff that's due on day 0. So that's really important to know, because that means that, think about that, if you got May of this year, you only have 6 months to do all this stuff. So you've got all these things you got to get done. Do this facility evaluation report, which I kind of skipped over, but that's the first kind of big requirement, along with some dust and other reports that are a little easier to do. This facility evaluation report's like a mega phase 1. So you're doing a desktop review, collecting all this information, putting it all together, and then deciding where you are going to investigate. Anyway, so the timeline goes on here, and then this is key here for those of us that are in northern climates. You've got to have your detection monitoring started 24 months. If you do the math, we're putting in monitoring networks this fall in order to get the 8 events. So it's tough to do that in the winter in some parts of the country. That was part of our comments to EPA. I don't think EPA cares. Those challenges are something you're going to have to overcome, I think is what they're saying. Same for the CCR used. You've got this information that's due on day 0, and then you've got a really short timeline, and that really is kind of the was kind of the crux of a lot of the comments that are doing. So I am going to leave it at that and open it up for some questions with the time we have left. Anyone? Questions? All right, I'm going to pose a question to y'all. So if I have a facility that was closed before the rule, and I don't know anything about it, but I know that it's by a river, and they probably dug a hole, what do you think the outcome is going to be if I start investigating that facility? Say it's just an ash pile. That is going to be the big concern, is plus inundation. So then you're going to have wet ash again. And so I guess I'm just curious, what do I do about that? If I'm a utility owner and I investigate it, yep, I got ash, I got 1 million cubic yards of ash in water. So one option, remove it somewhere else where it's dry. Anybody got any other ideas? I'm all ears, by the way.
Call me.
Soil well, right? You could put in a permanent groundwater extraction system and lower the water table. It's not, doesn't say you can't do it in the rule, so that might be another solution as well. So I'm gonna put a plug in for slurry walls on that one. Exactly, you could turn it into concrete, and there's a variety of ways of doing that. Any other ideas? Just since I got you all here.
Give me a call.
All right. All right. So with that, I will turn it over to whomever is next. And again, thanks to Kevin Solie and Mark for allowing us to get this in